She was the only daughter of Hollywood's first black screen goddess, Dorothy Dandridge. Born from a marriage that once looked like a fairy tale, Harolyn Suzanne Nicholas came into the world carrying a burden that would shape both her life and her mother's. Afflicted with severe brain damage from birth, she would spend her days not on red carpets or film sets, but in the shadows of caretakers and locked institutions. While Dorothy dazzled on screen, her greatest heartbreak remained hidden. Few fans knew the price she paid behind closed doors, or how that struggle followed her daughter long after her own tragic death. So, what really happened to Dorothy Dandridge's only child? And why does her story feel like a haunting continuation of her mother's fate? Stay with us as we uncover the untold story of Harolyn Suzanne Nicholas, the silent battles, the mystery, and the heartbreaking legacy she left behind. Dorothy Dandridge seemed to soar on screen with every note she sang and every close-up she commanded. From her early days as a nightclub prodigy to her groundbreaking Academy Award nomination for Carmen Jones, she carried herself as though she had been born for the spotlight. Audiences saw a dazzling star. What they did not see was the far harder role she played once the camera stopped rolling, that of a mother navigating heartbreak in silence. Dorothy's ascent had begun years earlier, under the smoky lights of Harlem's Cotton Club in the 1930s. As part of the Dandridge sisters, she sang alongside her sister Vivian and friend Etta Jones, sharing the stage with jazz legends of the day. Hollywood scouts quickly noticed her striking presence. So, too, did the club's famous tap-dancing headliners, the Nicholas brothers. Among them was Harold Nicholas, the younger brother whose gravity-defying dance moves and boyish charm dazzled both audiences and Dorothy herself. Their courtship was fast and intoxicating, the kind of romance that seemed destined for Hollywood headlines. On September 6, 1942, they married, becoming a picture of glamour and promise. Two young black entertainers who appeared ready to defy the barriers of both race and circumstance. But behind the fairy tale image, reality intruded quickly. Harold's life as a performer meant constant travel. Tours across Europe kept him away for weeks at a time. Even when he returned, his love of golf and nightlife often left Dorothy alone. She, in turn, carried the weight of ambition, auditioning for studio roles, training her voice and chasing every opportunity that might edge her closer to stardom. In those days, she believed she could balance it all: a marriage, a career, and the dream of building a family. Late that winter, Dorothy discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and determination, a new chapter to match her rising career. On September 2, 1943, after a long and difficult labor in Los Angeles, she gave birth to her daughter, Harolyn Suzanne Nicholas. What should have been a moment of celebration turned almost instantly to tragedy. Harolyn had suffered oxygen deprivation during delivery, leaving her with a severe intellectual disability. The diagnosis was devastating. Doctors offered little hope, warning that the child might never fully develop beyond an early stage of comprehension. In an era when resources for disabled children were scarce, especially for black families, Dorothy suddenly found herself facing an unimaginable burden. That single moment reshaped her life. It strained her already fragile marriage, drained her finances, and cast a long shadow over the career she was still desperately fighting to build. Yet she did not retreat. On screen, Dorothy dazzled the world. Off-screen, she became a mother consumed with finding specialists, paying for treatments, and searching for any path forward that might ease her daughter's suffering. From the outside, Dorothy Dandridge appeared to be living the dream of motherhood. In those first 2 years, her daughter, whom she affectionately called Harolyn Lynn, was the picture of health. She had a round, sturdy frame, rosy cheeks, and dimples that seemed made for the glossy pages of fan magazines. To onlookers, it was easy to imagine the little girl following her mother into a life of beauty and acclaim. But behind the camera's lens, troubling signs emerged. The milestones that other parents celebrated slipped by in silence. There was no delighted dada, no soft mama, no bright eyes locking onto her mother's smile. By the time Lynn turned 3, Dorothy's instincts had already told her something was terribly wrong. The specialists confirmed it in words that crushed her spirit. Oxygen deprivation during birth had caused permanent brain damage. The verdict was unyielding. Doctors told Dorothy that her daughter would never progress beyond the understanding of a small child. In the blunt, clinical language of the 1940s, Lynn was labeled with terms that today are considered deeply offensive, words that stung each time they echoed down sterile hospital corridors. For Dorothy, they were daggers, constant reminders that her little girl would never have the future she had once envisioned. Today, we honor Lynn's dignity by calling her condition what it truly was, an intellectual disability. Dorothy's reaction was a mix of resilience and despair. She refused to abandon her child to fate. Between late-night performances at the glamorous Macambo nightclub and nerve-wracking callback auditions on studio lots, she became both caretaker and advocate. Her earnings disappeared almost as quickly as they came in, swallowed up by neurologists' bills, speech therapy sessions, and endless consultations with child psychoanalysts. At home, Dorothy tried everything. She drilled flashcards at dawn, repeating words with quiet hope that one might finally stick. By evening, she stepped into rhinestone gowns and makeup, putting on a radiant face for audiences who had no idea of the heartbreak she carried backstage. She hoped desperately that a breakthrough would arrive before the press caught wind of her daughter's struggles. Hollywood thrived on perfection, and for a black actress already walking a precarious line in a segregated industry, imperfection could be fatal to her career. Yet Dorothy's star continued to rise. In 1953, she won acclaim for her tender role as a schoolteacher in Bright Road. Just a year later, she stunned the world in Carmen Jones, where her fiery performance earned her an Academy Award nomination, the first ever for a black woman in a leading role. To the public, she was a trailblazer, glamorous and untouchable, but privately, every triumph was tempered by another round of specialists for Lynn, another bill that eclipsed her earnings, another night of exhaustion masked behind a dazzling smile. Meanwhile, her marriage to Harold Nicholas was unraveling. Once the golden couple of Black Hollywood, their union was fraying under the weight of Dorothy's burdens and Harold's absences. He was often overseas, touring Europe with his tap act, sending back checks when he could and postcards filled with charm but little substance. The day-to-day care of their daughter rested squarely on Dorothy's shoulders. By 1951, the strain proved too great. The marriage ended in divorce, leaving Dorothy alone to face not only the relentless medical expenses, but also the emotional toll of raising Lynn in a world unprepared to support children like her. This was the point where Dorothy Dandridge's story tightened its grip, pulling her further into a battle few could see. On the surface, she was still the woman who had broken barriers, the first black actress to earn an Academy Award nomination for a leading role. Her name still carried the glow of Hollywood prestige. But behind the glamour, her finances were unraveling, and her spirit was being tested daily. Fame, once her armor, was now a fragile shell. And through it all, she remained a mother who refused to give up. By the summer of 1963, the weight of silence had grown unbearable. Every nightclub appearance, every cameo role, every check from a short-lived booking seemed to vanish instantly into clinic invoices and mounting tax notices. Dorothy was sinking. Then came the moment that shattered the last of her privacy. The private facility where Harolyn, by then a young woman of 20, was living refused to keep her without payment. Unable to collect, staff returned Lynn to Dorothy's doorstep, forcing her to face the world with the secret she had fought to shield for 2 decades. Dorothy now had no choice but to speak. She appeared on the Mike Douglas show, her voice steady as she told the truth she had hidden for years. Just out of frame, her hands trembled, but her words were unwavering. She described a daughter who required round-the-clock care and a society that offered almost no support for families like hers, especially families headed by a black woman in an industry obsessed with perfection. Only days later, Jet magazine published its now famous cover story, the tragic story of Dorothy Dandridge's daughter. The language stings to modern ears. Dorothy herself repeated it only because it was the medical terminology of the time and because she believed the shock might finally force the public to listen. The revelation struck a chord across America. Families wrote to her, pouring out stories of their own hidden struggles, their own children with disabilities, their own fears of stigma. Dorothy's courage gave them solidarity, but Hollywood was less forgiving. Studios, which had once prized her flawless image, grew wary. Nightclub bookers, once eager to display her beauty on stage, quietly turned to safer options. Speaking her truth had cost her dearly. With work drying up and bills piling higher, Dorothy was forced into a heartbreaking decision. The only affordable long-term option California offered was Camarillo State Hospital, a sprawling psychiatric and care institution north of Los Angeles. Dorothy personally toured the wards, speaking to staff, asking every question she could muster, desperate to know what kind of life her daughter might have there. Finally, with a heavy hand, she signed the admission papers. The resolve she showed inside the hospital cracked as soon as she stepped outside its doors. Even after surrendering Lynn to institutional care, Dorothy refused to give up the fight. She lent her voice to public service campaigns urging better funding for what were then called mental health schools. She answered letters from strangers, stacks of them, from parents who recognized their own pain in hers. Yet despite her efforts, the mathematics of care never worked in her favor. The bills outpaced the bookings. Debt notices multiplied. Auditions grew fewer, and the glamour that had once shielded her was slipping away. Hollywood's brightest barrier breaker now found herself wondering not only how she would survive, but whether her story and her daughter's would be remembered at all. Inside Camarillo State Hospital, Harolyn Lynn Nicholas entered a world that was all but invisible to the public eye. Cameras never followed her there, and the strict privacy laws surrounding such institutions kept her story locked away. Her mother, once a luminous star commanding marquees across America, now lived on the other side of those locked doors. Mother and daughter remained bound together by blood and love, yet they were forced down separate paths that history was already beginning to forget. For Dorothy, the fight continued, but her strength was running out. She was living on borrowed time. Nightclub appearances, once multi-night engagements in glamorous venues, dwindled to one-night bookings that barely paid her bills. Hopes of a film comeback evaporated when potential backers discovered the extent of her financial troubles. The IRS seized her beloved Hollywood Hills home, stripping her of yet another piece of stability. Friends noticed that champagne glasses once raised in celebration were replaced by bottles of pills, numbing her pain but deepening her decline. On September 8, 1965, just 1 week after Lynn's 22nd birthday, Dorothy was found lifeless in her small West Hollywood apartment. Beside her lay an empty bottle of antidepressants. Whether it had been a deliberate act or a tragic accident was never settled. What was certain, however, was that Hollywood had lost one of its brightest barrier breakers. At only 42 years old, Dorothy Dandridge was gone. Lynn remained behind, still within the walls of Camarillo, now a ward of the state of California. With Dorothy gone, there was no close family willing or able to claim full custody. Her father, Harold Nicholas, was long divorced and largely absent, still touring the world as one half of the legendary Nicholas brothers. He sent what support he could, but he lived mostly overseas, later remarrying and experiencing a late-career resurgence on Broadway and in films such as Tap in 1989. His death in 2000 closed yet another door on Lynn's personal history, leaving her memory to be pieced together only from distant relatives and sealed institutional files. When Camarillo itself shut down in 1997 as California phased out its large psychiatric hospitals, patients were scattered to smaller care facilities or placed in community homes. No public roster was ever published. Researchers and biographers believe Lynn was transferred somewhere within Los Angeles County. But from that point onward, her trail disappears into the silence of privacy laws and rumors. Yet no death certificate has ever been produced, and state agencies remain firm in their refusal to confirm or deny under confidentiality rules. The result is a void, a silence that feels almost deliberate. The daughter of a woman who made history on screen slipped out of history's frame almost entirely. What does remain is the echo of Dorothy's fight. She was a pioneering black actress who, even as her own star dimmed, used what power she had to plead for a society that might one day recognize her child's worth. Her legacy is not only in the roles that broke barriers in Hollywood, but in the private battle she waged against systems that refused to open their doors to her. Her life and Lynn's remind us that fame can coexist with invisibility, that triumph can live side by side with heartbreak, and that the victories Dorothy claimed on stage and screen never spared her from the brutal inequities she faced in private. As for Harold Nicholas, he never stopped dancing. After his divorce from Dorothy, he built a new life in Paris and London, dazzling European audiences with the same acrobatic brilliance that had once lit up the Cotton Club. By the late 1970s, he had returned to the United States, coaching Broadway performers and passing down his artistry to a new generation. In 1989, he appeared alongside Gregory Hines and Savion Glover in the film Tap, a triumphant farewell to the art form he had helped define. Yet even as he basked in applause, friends say Lynn was never far from his thoughts. He kept a photograph of her in his dressing room kit, a private reminder of a daughter he could never fully claim. Distance, relentless touring schedules, and the complexities of U.S. guardianship laws meant his involvement in her life was sporadic at best. A stroke in 1993 slowed him down, and in 2000, he died in New York City, survived by his second wife and a circle of younger dancers who revered him as a mentor. With Dorothy's death, Harolyn's fate was sealed. She was eventually committed to a state mental institution, one of many facilities where patients often lived out their days in obscurity. Decades later, Dorothy's story was revived in the 1999 HBO biopic, Introducing Dorothy Dandridge. Actress Halle Berry, who portrayed Dorothy, sought to honor her life with accuracy and compassion. During production, Berry revealed that she had tried to find Harolyn. The state institution she was in burned down several years ago, and nobody knows where Lynn went afterward, she explained. The disappearance underscored how little society had valued the life of Dorothy's only child, even as her mother's legend was celebrated on screen. According to online records, Harolyn Suzanne Nicholas is believed to have died in 2003, though no official death certificate or burial site has ever surfaced. Her end, much like her life, remains shrouded in silence. Harolyn did, however, have a half-brother, Melly C. Nicholas, born in 1958 from one of Harold Nicholas's later relationships after his divorce from Dorothy. Like Harolyn, Melly also died in 2003, a haunting parallel that year. He left behind a wife, Janice F. Stout. Their father, Harold Nicholas, had passed away just 3 years earlier in 2000, following complications from a stroke. And Lynn, her story ends not with a headline, but with whispers. A closed hospital, sealed files, a rumored death date no certificate has confirmed. What survives is not the paperwork of the state, but the fierce love her mother poured into every doctor's visit, every late-night rehearsal meant only to finance one more clinic bill. Only a handful of photographs of Harolyn exist in the public domain. A few family pictures capture Dorothy holding her daughter as a baby, and some images occasionally surfaced in magazines that wrote about Dorothy's private life. But unlike her mother, who was frequently photographed at premieres and glamorous events, Harolyn lived almost entirely outside of the public spotlight. The scarcity of photographs has only deepened the mystery. Most people remember her as a child in her mother's arms, leaving many to wonder what she might have looked like as an adult. The life of Harolyn Suzanne Nicholas reminds us of the struggles hidden behind Hollywood glamour. While Dorothy dazzled audiences in films like Bright Road and Carmen Jones, her heart and thoughts were always with her daughter. Dorothy's choice to speak publicly about Harolyn's condition was groundbreaking. It shattered taboos of the 1960s and revealed the human side of a woman too often remembered only for her beauty. Harolyn's story also reflects how children with disabilities were treated in mid-20th century America. At a time when options for inclusive care were scarce, many families, especially those without resources, were left with little choice but to turn to institutions. Today, her life is remembered with greater compassion, respect, and recognition for the quiet courage she and her mother embodied. Dorothy Dandridge shattered Hollywood's color line on screen, yet spent her private life battering at doors that would not open for a black woman fighting for decent care for her child. That contradiction is painful, but it is also the heart of her legacy. She proved that visibility in one arena does not guarantee justice in another, and her story reminds us that even dazzling progress under the spotlights can still leave entire families struggling in the dark. That's a wrap for this video. Thanks for hanging out with us. If you enjoyed it and want to hear more, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so you'll be notified when the next video drops. See you next time.